Hope whenever you want.
Dear all, shall we? Are we back online? Inigo?
Yes, we are. All
How is
yours.
Spain doing so far?
Fine.
Netherlands here is doing well, right? You know, a little bit of a misty day, but anyway.
It looks like Eurovision.
Yeah, exactly. 12 points, yeah? Sorry for the perhaps not that good joke. Dear participants, dear all, thank you. As we said when we started off this conference, it's hard to say actually good morning or good afternoon because we have altogether more than 80 participants registered from all over the world. So we live basically in different time zones. But anyway, for us here, Inigo and me, it's afternoon, it's mid-afternoon, and we are getting in another exciting kind of part of this conference, which is a panel debate. And for the panel debate, we've got 4 great panel members whom I briefly would like to introduce, and they perhaps can also just say hi, because then all of us can see them already on screen. First of all, we've got Kirsten Mogensen from Denmark, associate professor and work for the Department of Social Sciences and Business at the University of Roskilde. Hi, Kirsten. Then we've got our keynote, Wilfried Bolowski, professor professor of international law and diplomacy at the American Graduate School in Paris, former diplomat and advisor to Angela Merkel, and I think she doesn't need any further introduction. Hi, Wilfried, back again. And we've got Sean Riordan. Thank you. Hi, Sean.
I hope.
Former diplomat, decades of experience, a senior research fellow at Klingendahl, working for the International College in Madrid, being a consultant for different entities in different parts of the world. Thank you so much for joining us. And then we've got Inigo Arbiol. Inigo, thank you. You're a pioneer as well, because I think you've got perhaps the first master in international relations and business diplomacy in the world. And that is something to be very proud of. And you're the director of that master. So thank you, and great that you're on the panel as well. I'd give Inigo. I'll give you to manage the slides, because our the procedure is that we have 4 statements, and these 4 statements, each statement will be introduced by one of the panel members, and I would ask the panel members just to take 2 to 3 minutes, and then we give the floor to the participants and try to see the different views on the statements. So Inigo, if you could present the slide with the first statement, and be more skillful than I was earlier this afternoon, then that would be a great thing. And again,
I already shared it. Can you
yeah,
see the screen?
Thank you. We do see it. Thank you so much. So the COVID-19 pandemic will trigger corporations towards a stakeholder focus instead of a shareholder focus. This statement will be introduced by Kirsten Mogensen from Roskilde University. Kirsten, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Now my screen was suddenly took away my what I was going to. So here it is. Yeah. So I was going to introduce the topic. COVID-19 pandemic will trigger corporations towards stakeholder focus instead of shareholder focus. And Dr. Bolewski already presented this view also. And during the day, we have heard many good reasons for it. One of them is that trust, as Anders also mentioned. The problem is that seen from a corporation perspective, they used to have a lot of trust over the last 20 years. Then during the pandemic, they have lost that trust to governments. James Dediri, an Australian professor, some years ago published a historical analysis, and the implications of that was that people will seek to trust the institutions that can best protect them. And so that means that trust creates bargaining power and more freedom. And when people lose trust in business to secure them a good life, then business will also could expect more restrictions. And trust in business has decreased. There has, for example, also been a poster in the United States saying, you know, you will die for the economy, or you should die for the economy. We have seen this discussion between the economy and the protection of people's health. And it has, where business seemed to have focused in the arguments for how important the economy is, and which has damaged the trust in them to actually care for people. So I think that after the pandemic, they will have to work to recreate some kind of trust. And to do that, they will need to engage in diplomatic activities at all levels, including international organizations, state government, and other corporations, civil society. And if they don't get this trust, then someone else will get it, and then people will turn to the government, or maybe if they don't think the government can solve the problem, they will turn to religious leaders, and this may not be an advantage for business. So I think that business has self-interest in engaging seriously in business, in diplomatic activities with all the actors in society. So, we have heard some good cases today, including from Mark and Raymond. And I have also published some cases from Indonesia and Myanmar, where I think that using corporate public diplomacy could have solved problems with local communities, problems that was very damaging, not only to the communities, but also to the corporations. Yeah, and since it's also should leave place to other people, I will stop here, but I'll be happy to join discussion of how it can be done in practice. I've been publishing about that and the legitimate issues related to this kind of corporate public diplomacy. Yeah, I hope this.
Thank you, Kirsten. That's a clear first kind of an introduction and explanation for why you think that indeed the pandemic will actually trigger corporations to turn towards a more stakeholder focus. Do we have views on this from the audience? We've got currently more than 40 people being online here, so please feel free to take the floor. You can enter it in the chat or start taking just by unmuting and.
Yeah, can I?
Hi, Hoop.
Oh yeah, here we are. Very good.
Just a very quick answer. I think definitely, especially now we all know that the wealth destruction in different countries are very severe. We're not talking about 1%, 2%. Take UK for example. The COVID, estimated has cost almost 7% of GDP in terms of growth. And so that's one point to support this, saying that the business and the society as a whole have to refigure, to figure out how do we reconfigure our social contract as well as our economic arrangement. So winner takes all kind of a mentality doesn't really fit. And the second point to support this is if you look at the Davos or the World Economic Forum's recent publication, it's all about stakeholder capitalism. So the word is in. Okay, so once the word is in, it's very difficult to retreat and say, no way, we're not going to talk about stakeholder capitalism. Instead, we want to talk about shareholder value as sort of enjoy primacy. And the third point, I think, we are painfully aware the lack of social equity, and because of the past arrangement that has exaggerated and exacerbated the social inequality. And today the voices in different countries are very loud. It's not just about Black Lives Matters, but it's also about the lower level of the socioeconomic strata, and the younger generation will be coming in because they don't see as many economic opportunities and employment. So I think the statement one I will support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Litya. Do we have more critical views? Because one could also say, yeah, we hope, perhaps we're still perhaps now hoping, and although Litya gave a few very, I think, strong indicators that perhaps it's hard to retrieve and get back to the old normal, because there are indications that we're moving towards a more stakeholder capitalism point of view, but more critical or.
Oh, okay, Hoop, I'm going to stick my head out. As we all know that, since when we look at the change process or development process, when you have a push, there's a counter push. So that's just the sort of natural phenomenon of our physical world. So of course, there's going to be a lot of resistance. When you have to somehow reduce your share of the pie, or I don't mean you, but sort of if you are already a winner in this game, and reducing the shareholder part of the pie, the share of the pie is very difficult. If we look at the business school, we have not really seriously discussed one fundamental premise of the compensation, right? We do not discuss, why a CEO in certain societies can generate 200% or even more, or 1,000%, in terms of income versus the lower average income. I mean, in societies, we need to have similar discussions. So of course, there's going to be a backlash. Mm-hmm. To talk about, smooth transition is kind of nice, but we shouldn't be naive. There will be a lot of backlash, and there will be a lot of sort of a discussion and misinformation. So I think, we are at the threshold for a potential tipping over to a different arrangement, but it's not guaranteed. So it is part of the reason why we are here talking about, the business diplomats at the interface between the business and the larger society. What could be done differently, and what message needs to be to bring back in, not just about bringing back out, but bring back in inside of the corporation to stimulate different kind of discussion and innovation. If you just allow me one more word, just look at the international arena. We cannot discuss living wage when the wage paid or the minimum wage in some countries are lower than their own poverty line. And business are not in the conversation about fair working conditions. I mean, so that is a lot of things need to happen. Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry, can I come in quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, just to the first statement, Christine, and what Christine said. There was an article in The Guardian about a month or 2 months ago describing different directions countries took after the Spanish flu, which was a terrible period with millions who died. In some countries, governments and companies were looking for solutions to improve on the conditions of relations between the different stakeholders. In other countries, the need to face this emergency led to a further controlling, including at the end to fascism in Spain and in Portugal. So the discussion here, I bring this up because we should think of companies not alone being single islands. They're embedded in a larger society. So if they could contribute to making the future less vulnerable of their society to pandemics, I think it would also have positive implications for the society as the societies will be structured in the future, hopefully towards more democracy. But pandemics and emergencies could lead to an over-control, which partially is justified to face the pandemic, but then unwillingness to let go, and instead a further grabbing of power with fatal outcomes when it comes to the type of society that came out of a pandemic. That's all I wanted to say.
Hope you've got your microphone off.
Yep, here I am back again. Sorry. So thank you, Raymond. That's really interesting. And also referring us to that Guardian article, I would be very interested in reading it indeed, the different turns and then what you said about it. Great, thanks. Kirsten, would you like to add a final word on with the inputs that you got?
Yeah, thank you very much for this input. But I think we agree that that this could probably be the case, that we will have a more stakeholder focus. I agree with some of the other speakers here that I don't see that corporations will be allowed back to the situation before, where they could argue that, they knew better than governments and so on how to protect us, because people have, I think it's different from country to country at least, but in some countries at least, people have lost trust in the fact that the business will actually better than government solve the problems during a crisis situation, because the arguments they have put forward during this crisis have very much been focused on their own ability to earn money. So I think that, and that's also what we see from the trust research, that there will be new requirements. And I think that will be the case. I don't think we will allow as much freedom unless they start taking on some diplomatic approaches to stakeholders.
Thank you, Kirsten. Let's continue, because our second statement, if you will, if you could move our slide to the next slide, thank you, is still related to it. And as you can read, the second statement is, in a post-COVID-19 world, capitalism can only survive with the inclusion of transnational solidarity, empathy, and a practical duty to due diligence and humanist care. And I would like to ask Sean Riordan to take that one as a starting point for and share his views on this one.
Okay, thank you, Hub. First of all, a very quick comment on the first statement. I think it's very Eurocentric. In Europe, we like stakeholders, we like to be very conscious of regulations and our moral duties. The big Chinese companies couldn't care less. And so we may have a problem to the extent that we want to be moral, we find we're losing influence in the world to those who don't want to be moral. And that feeds into this, because I have a problem with this statement. This statement is either meaningless or wrong, because it doesn't say what we mean by capitalism. And if we leave capitalism as a fairly, fluid phrase, of course capitalism is going to survive. Capitalism has never needed transnational solidarity to survive. It doesn't work on the basis of empathy, and a practical duty to due diligence is what most capitalist businessmen are trying to avoid most of their lives. So I think literally it's not true. So instead of sticking with this particular statement, I want to pick out a couple of things that I think COVID-19 has changed. And rather than changing, it's accelerated and exaggerated. So one area is it's massively increased inequalities both within our societies and between our societies and other societies. Secondly, it's accelerated digitalization in our societies. I think the third thing, it's rendered the West even less relevant than it was before. That if we had a reputation at the end of the 20th century that we in the West knew how to run economies, we knew how to manage crises, we knew how to do wars, or at least the more bellicose Western nations knew how to do war, we've seen those reputations steadily destroyed. Iraq destroyed the West's military reputation. The economic crisis in 2008, 2009 destroyed our reputation of being competent economic managers. We're clearly not. And now I think the pandemic has destroyed our reputation for good governance and the ability to manage crises, because I'm afraid Asian countries, practically all Asian countries, have done it massively better than we've done it. And I think I have to take issue with Kirsten here on one issue. I don't think we've improved the reputation for governments of handling crises. We've just demonstrated that governments at whatever level in Europe have reacted very badly. The European Union has had a terrible pandemic. National governments, where I live in Spain, has been particularly incompetent, but none of them have actually done very well. So I think first lesson out of this is massive humility. I think secondly, we also need to understand how policies we have adopted to deal with the crisis have made inequality worse. Our central bank policies have made inequality far worse by pumping up the value of assets to the benefits of those who are wealthy enough to own assets, while driving down wages and leaving most people in poverty with no feed into the economy. So you have to understand that our own policies are actually driving the problems. Digitalization threatens to make it even worse. The more that we're working online, the more we realize, I was talking to a company director the other day who said home working being fantastic. He'd been able to identify which employees were any good. He'd been able to see which employees contributed nothing to the company. And he'd been able to identify which employees can be automated, which functions can be automated. You don't need people doing them at all. And however moral we feel about all of this, we've got to understand that cost pressures on companies, on governments, are going to drive further digitalization, further automation. So it starts putting questions not as to whether capitalism can only survive with transnational solidarity or taking non-economic policies, but what kind of societies do we want to live in? Let's forget whether capitalism can survive. Let's start thinking about what kind of societies we want to live in. Do we want to increase this massive inequality that we're seeing within our societies and between our societies and other societies? And that's the final point to bear in mind here is the conflict of agendas. we can have our agendas about regulation, about climate change, about pandemic disease, about poverty, about mass migration. We've also got to remember there is another agenda out there, which is a geopolitical agenda. The agenda of countries following what they perceive as their national interests, relating to territory, balance of power, zones of influence. And it's real. We keep discovering this. Every time in Europe we try to get moral and think about a globalized world, we find that Russia invades Georgia, or Russia seizes Crimea, or the Chinese build another island in the South China Seas, or we get more Russian overflights into NATO countries. And this geopolitical world threatens to undermine whatever solidarity we try and establish. Because for many governments, including many Western governments, this is more important, it's more urgent. If you get the geopolitics wrong, you pay for it yourself. If you get climate change wrong, it's going to be your grandson politician or your granddaughter politician who's going to suffer the consequences. So with that douche of cold water, I will leave it for the debate.
Thank you, Sean, for waking us up.
I would like to take the defense of this statement. Do you hear me?
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Sean certainly made a very strong case criticizing it, but he has not quite fulfilled the task to defend it. Let me try to defend it. In a cum-COVID world, and here, first of all, I would like to correct or propose a correction to the statement itself. We will not move into a post-COVID world so far as we would like to, We should rather consider a cum-COVID world, because if it isn't COVID, it will be another one. The quest for the status quo ante, Sean's idea, back to capitalism as it was, back to geopolitics as we have lived in the 20th century. This idea of status quo ante cannot be the compass for getting out of this situation. And capitalism will best survive with what is in this statement, the inclusion of transnational solidarity, empathy, and practical duty for societal duty, diligence, and humanist care. This is not hot air. This is not wishful thinking. This is the social credit of corporations in the future. So let's look into the future more than dread the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Whoa, Wilfried, that puts another great entry to this debate. I would love to invite others to add their views. And we're waiting. I believe, feel free to unmute your mic and speak up. This should be a free place for all kinds of voices and views to be heard. Or, yeah, here we go, I think.
I would just like to add a point, because when you look at transnational solidarity, it sounds nice on paper, but we actually see, for example, United Nations, a lot of people have not paid their dues right now. There's no money, the management of refugees. You can see what Europe's actually done is sign backhand deals. Italy says stay in Libya. European Union says send them back to Turkey. And the war that was in Syria was outside interference. So I'm not really sure. I think that's an idealist speaking, but I think the reality is a lot more complicated, and it's a lot of hidden agendas. I tend to agree with Sean. It is really very messy down on that. I'm actually based in Dubai. So we see a whole other side over here of multiple people interfering and maybe the past history that's there. Corporations, I think, and I want to bring back this point back to statement one, if you don't change the shareholder laws, I think they are always going to be for profit, because that's the way they are judged. So I think it comes back to what governments are actually going to do on how do you build shareholders and what voice they have, because that, as a shareholder, I want profits. That's where my return comes in. So it really ties the hands of companies also in that respect. And I think it makes them a little bit mercenary. Now, whether it's a chicken and egg story, I don't know which one comes first, but I think there's the idealist version, and I hope people would become more humanistic. But the reality is I see people unemployed when companies have a lot of money and can keep them employed during a COVID where they can't go and find another job. I saw international students left back behind. I was reading about Oxford recently. Was it Berkeley that sent a letter saying, please leave for Christmas, but there's no dorms available for them. Where do international students go? During lockdown, there were many people stranded between borders. Even now, Australians cannot easily return back to Australia. So it sounds ideal. I'm not sure whether we've learned. I'm being very pessimistic, but.
Thank you. Clear. More views, other views, oppositions, or agree? Is it, thank you for sharing quite dark, a realistic perspective, or actually quite dark view on the world we live in, with our feet on the ground rather than dreaming of a better future.
May I just ask
Oh,
Sean a quick question?
Oh, yes.
I agree with most of his analysis, and I'm wondering, Sean, what is the view that you have about what the future will be and could be?
Sean.
Okay. I think we need, look, just to give an example of why I cannot share Wilfred's optimism, and this gives us an idea of where we're going. One of the key tasks in dealing with COVID-19 is to understand its origins, to understand the phylogenesis of the virus, so that we can understand its spread and we can think about looking to the future. This should be a scientific inquiry. In fact, it's become a geopolitical blame game, where everyone blames China, then China blames everyone else, and the possibility of an objective scientific investigation into the origins of this disease seem almost, at the moment at least, impossible. We find that the World Health Organization, that ought to be leading this, has become geopolitical football that's being kicked around for whatever purposes by different geopolitical actors. This is why I am doubtful about the viability of transnational solidarity in a world where the major players don't want it. The major national players aren't interested. And going to the point about profit and whether shareholders can be profit driven, central banks are encouraging them in that direction through their purchases of assets, their negative interest rates, which drive up asset prices and reinforce the idea that you invest in a company as a speculative exercise in increasing your personal wealth. So not only are we not moving towards stakeholder models, which the Chinese wouldn't understand anyway, our central bank policy is encouraging people in the other direction. I think looking forward, Raymond said looking forward, I think we're going to see the world pretty much as it always was. That's a world that is hammered by pandemic disease. And by the way, when I say always was, Wilfred, I'm not saying we're going back to the pre-COVID world. I think we're going back to the world of pre-1900. We're going back to a multipolar geopolitical world in which there is conflicts over sovereignty, there is conflict over territory, over influence, and where we are beset on a routine basis by pandemic diseases.
I don't think you'll have many followers in your way.
I don't need followers. I just need major governments who go in that direction. And that's where they're going. And I think what we are going to see is reduced international exchange, because air travel is going to get much more difficult. So we're going to be reducing the extent to which you start moving around the world, which is a good thing because it reduces carbon emissions. We're going to see health checks that will be as effective as security checks when we pass through airports. We're going to see increasing fear, because this won't be the first and last pandemic. We're going to see, we've nearly had 6 this century already. We will see pandemics on a routine basis. And we will see an increasing divide between North and South. And Europe, because of its focus on regulation and being the nice guys, will become ever less relevant. And we'll find some European countries becoming ever more geopolitical. I'm thinking about the French. The French government, in many ways, is abandoning all these European agendas to pursue its own confrontation with Turkey, its own geopolitical issues, interest in the Mediterranean and in Africa. So that's where I see the world going. Would I like it to be transnational solidarity, empathy, and a practical duty to due diligence and humanistic care? You bet I would love it. But I think pursuing it is dangerous if you don't realize just how difficult it's going to be, and that you've got to convince, if you don't convince Vladimir Putin, and you don't convince Xi Jinping or Modi or other leaders who are now surpassing the West in terms of relevance, certainly Europe, then you're not going to get anywhere.
Mary,
For you, the floor. You've got the final say now in this statement.
In one sentence, contrary to the 20th century, well depicted by Sean, policy is nowadays made not only through national interest and power play, but through public opinion, and they demand solutions.
Thank you. I mean, Sean?
Europe, yeah, and the rest of the world, no.
Okay. Let's move to the third statement, because perhaps we may continue part of what we've started now, so don't worry, there will be space. Inigo, thank you. And then I'll indeed ask Wilfried to introduce us into statement number 3. Businesses need engaged government and vice versa to solve global challenges with a sense of shared responsibility.
Mutual engagement. We all know the reluctance of business against corporate diplomacy or business diplomacy. They are of economic, political, and educational nature. I will sum them up in 2 quotes. We duck and cover if political processes do not directly relate corporate self-interest. And the second one, we are ambassadors for the corporations, not the country. As well, on the other side, as an insider, I might say there are also certain shortcomings in government circles against corporate business diplomacy. And they are the resilience, adaptation of new reality. Power should be centralized. Speed is definitely impossible to deal with, and control is necessary. There is, on the other hand, a fundamental need for government to alter how foreign policy is conducted, and that is to be in a more participatory leadership. Up to now, we all know leadership tends to prefer the traditional hierarchical structures and formalized procedures. I have recommendations for both. For government, to bring public, private, and civil societies actors together and build relationship with a variety of stakeholders to collectively address transnational problems. And number 2 is the government should cultivate a non-hierarchical network and live by an engagement strategy of connect, share, and lead, and treat all these partners equally so that they feel valued. My recommendations for business is corporations should expand their networks. We all know, to the common good. Here I support who and his ideas. They should take into consideration ethical dimensions, sure. And it all sums up in business should invest in the common good to secure a stable environment for their future markets. Thank you.
We've got a first. So businesses need engaged government and vice versa. Thank you for explaining and elaborating on this. Again, back a bit. Okay, no, I don't. I will not reopen what you just. Let's see for new inputs. Who's willing to? Please feel free to take the floor. To unmute.
Oh, I can probably.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, from looking at what has been this last almost year from a perspective of a multinational, I think one of the conclusions, and we'll see how memory will last or not in a couple of more years, but governments are coming out stronger in this crisis. companies are more aware of roles of government, some of them because they need bailouts, but also they need more the diplomatic networks, and also they need support outside. So maybe governments have an opportunity of having some leverage to put a positive pressure on what they would like the companies to do. And we see that in a way in Europe, how some resources, some bailouts are kind of being incentivized to be spent in a certain direction aligned with policy. We see all this digital agenda, and of course, green conversion, green agenda. So this is very likely to be happening because governments have more responsibility, but on the other way, they're coming out stronger, more accountable, and even the civil society might have a different view now that probably governments are more needed than what many people thought a couple of years ago. So this provides a strong incentive for business to engage with governments, not only locally at home, but especially abroad in gaining access to new assets, in doing sales. So this might even be looked as an opportunity. So, but again, we'll see how long it lasts, because memory sometimes is very weak, and in a couple of years, if everything goes back to close to what it was before, we will all forget about this. But at the moment, there might be an opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just add in? So I agree with you that the governments have gotten a lot more policy room. That's obvious. I mean, they can refuse people to come into their country, and they can decide how they should behave. And just the fact that the bargaining power of corporations have at least been broken for a year or so will already have given the governments an indication that at least they can have more bargaining power than they used to have.
Yeah, thank you. Do we see, anyone other thoughts on these?
Yeah, again, I have one.
Yeah.
One thought. I think what is maybe a solution is to have a much stronger civil society, to have not just the government and companies, which end up maybe with monopolies or some other domination that is not necessarily sustainable. But if we have a third actor, in this case, different forms of civil society, to kind of put both the government and business a bit in check, I think that could be much better for future sustainability.
Can I
Sean.
And I'm not going to attack Wilfred this time. I actually agree with him about engagement between governments. I have a question I'd like to put to him, and then a second point I'd like to make. I wonder, Wilfred, how do you see the engagement between governments and the big internet companies? I'm thinking it's a particularly European problem, in that internet companies are either American or they're Chinese. We don't have big European companies, and that makes engagement and regulation much harder. I think that's going to be one of the key issues over the next decade. On the question of how governments are taking advantage of this, I think it is true that every time we have a security crisis, governments become more important. We suddenly discover why we need governments and national governments rather than multinational organizations. National governments become much more important. We saw it after 2001, we're seeing it now. Whether that lasts or not, to a large extent, is going to depend on our perception of how pandemic disease continues, and whether we see this as a persistent threat going into the future. But there is a danger out there that what we're seeing among companies being encouraged by governments is a consolidation into ever bigger corporations that ultimately are going to become more powerful and more difficult to deal with because you cannot allow them to collapse. They become too big to fail. And this, I'm particularly thinking of the movement within Europe to create ever bigger banks. We're seeing it in Spain now. All the banks in Spain are being told they've got to merge to produce ever larger banks, which will become harder in the end for governments to manage.
Thank you. Another provocative entry here.
If I was to say something, you know, the engagement between government and corporations, it just reminded me of the situation in Ukraine, where I've just been an election observer for a couple of months, and where there's a very strong personal intermix between business and governments. So now I forgot who it was that stressed the importance of the civil society in this case. I think that is a very good point. It's very important to have the civil society check, so it's not only a link between government and corporations.
Okay.
Sean has asked me a question, if I may answer or comment on it. Indeed, these internet companies have moved and grown into a quasi-state entity, even with their own money, beyond the control and authority of states. So the problem is there, and it's growing. Resolutions, twofold in my view. Public opinion will rise. Everybody is concerned by it. Some states are incapable of even controlling their own companies. So I think an international cooperation will be necessary. The bad news, the dysfunctional international organizations as they seem to be incapable of dealing with it. So an opening for new structures, new needs, because there are new problems to deal with.
Thank you. And isn't the fact that we have these so-called big corporations, as Sean says, they're American or Chinese, actually just a result of, call it, the neoliberal policies that we've been supporting in the past 50 years? And shouldn't this be a signal that this has really emerge and cause to these monsters to exist? I mean, I just heard today that the American government or the US finally think that Facebook became too powerful. Okay, from a European perspective, we could have said, yeah, that's something that we've seen already. That's what we saw already much earlier, but the Americans were a bit slow to see it as well. So perhaps that's what I'm trying to say. These kind of happenings may even force us to see, like, hey, we need new structures. Thank you, Wilfried, to deal with this, and also structural changes not to make this or let this happen for the future, because this causes all kinds of problems, where fake news perhaps is the least big one.
Hello. Yeah, I think what Sean raised is a good point. I think when you look at the high-tech companies and their dominance, it's a form of oligopoly, and which in itself can be discussed as a good or is not so good for society. And most economists think it's not good long term. However, what these bigger technology companies have been doing is not to innovate themselves, but they buy up innovative small companies. So there is this consolidation of a big, gigantic company that doesn't necessarily produce new things. But on the other hand, I can understand that some government officials think that needs to be the way it is to match, let's say, the Chinese threat. So we have more of quantity and less of quality. Quality, I mean innovativeness, a bit of competition between companies. So I think it's a short-sighted decision by our policymakers to allow this to continue, the high-tech oligopolies. Long term, I think it's going to be damaging in terms of just the creativity that our economies need to have to continuously change and adapt. But the high techs are just making it less and less possible because they just simply buy up whatever is creative and new.
Thank you. I mean, thanks, Raymond, for that remark. I mean, loads of things that we can respond to this or add on to this. So perhaps you gave a nice start for the final statement, which we reserved for Inigo. And that is business diplomacy, perhaps prepared companies to participate as proactive actors, bigger or smaller, but let Inigo introduce it, in international relations. Inigo, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Hope. Now I see if I provoke a little bit more, but on the existing debate. So on this statement, basically, I wanted to say that business diplomacy, what it has done is to prepare companies to participate as proactive actors in a way that they have woke up to their capacity to co-shape. Right? I think they have. Stelios before mentioned the fact that some of them have been doing things without realizing that what they were doing is something that is a know-how, there's an expertise that is accumulated in the company that has to be transferred, etc. Right? So, I in other words, I said it's woke up to the capacity to co-shape the future of the ecosystem, not only dealing with the existing norms, regulations, expectations, but also shape the next ones, right? And well, I don't want to be provocative, but apart, we could think that corporations will be actively engaged into improving the ecosystem, but we could also see that corporations could also use this possibility to undermine ongoing efforts, right? Once you walk up to an ability, you could be on the bright or the dark side of the force, right? And so, what is going to be defining that the proactivity of these of business of the corporations, right? It's I think it's connected with some of the issues we tackled before about stakeholders, shareholders balance. Also with global interdependence, I think they are connected with this global interdependence issue. There is no clear limit for national sovereignty power to regulate these days, and the corporations now. The second thing is corporations know that everyone is subject to everyone's accountability. In this, in my opinion, we can open debate for that. Includes countries where public opinion hasn't been taken into account that much, right? And the third point on this global interdependence is, I think politics are no longer left in the hands of politicians, and this is connected with many things, with populism, with civil society that Raymond mentioned before. So corporations have to be aware of these things, right? And I think the a key element on this, it's the third statement discussion we had about stronger governments, right? Strong governments that could be acting as shelters for companies. I think that this is a key argument. If these stronger governments are to be acting as shelters for companies, they need to ask something in exchange to those companies. And that's something in exchange. For me, it's to participate in a balance between economic development and social cohesion, right? They have to be able to develop public policies that create and promote economic development with the corporations, with the companies, with the private sector, but intended to create a social cohesion, or if you want, an economy that that functions on a no one left behind principle, right? And this is the price that, in my opinion, public policies have to be asking the companies if they want to be taking advantage of those strong governments' shelter capacity, right? So, summarizing, the the business diplomacy has ring the bell for companies to act as international actors in international relations. Now they have the chance to decide which side they can operate, they will operate. And a key element of this is they understand the ecosystem new realities that I mentioned, and also the role of those stronger governments to interact in with the corporations.
Thank you. So businesses are at a crossroads, more or less. They need to choose.
Yeah, should I say something about that? Because
Kirsten.
I think that is true, that they have a huge opportunity if they understand the game. They have the resources, and if they understand how to use the diplomatic tools so that they really gain the trust and take the different interests into consideration, as Dr. Bulewski talked about earlier, then they could play a huge constructive role in world affairs. But it requires that they do that.
And do we think that's a good thing? Because we keep on now more or less agreeing that it is a good thing that we can leave things in the hands of businesses. Although, Kirsten, you say like then they need to regain trust, rebuild trust. But if they do so, it would be a good thing that they pick up their responsibility.
I would prefer that we had a working democracy. Unfortunately, that is a problem very many places in the world, and many places where they have democracy and even long traditions for it, it has developed in a more corrupt way. So it's a chance for business if they want to go that way. I think they can do it. But of course, I have been election observer for 25 years. My heart is beating for democracy. And of course, if business take over, it's not democracy.
But businesses are not democratically operating or entities or so that's a risk as well. I mean, if we leave things in the hands of business, and actually, as we in the world we live now, we live it in the hands of shareholders. So, well, I'm just provoking. Please.
Could I comment? I sometimes feel that I'm living in a parallel universe to the one being described in the panel. Inigo talks as if business diplomacy is something new. Business diplomacy has been around for decades, centuries. I'm reading a book on the East India Company at the moment. They definitely did diplomacy and warfare and genocide and the whole range of things that governments do. And they made a nice profit from it. So I don't think we should think of this as necessarily being new. If we think about the oil companies during the 20th century and the role that the big oil companies play, they, in effect, the big oil companies had their own foreign ministries inside, often staffed by ex-diplomats and intelligence officers. So the idea that business diplomacy in some way new, I think is wrong. And business diplomacy serves the interests of the company. And the first interest of the company is to make a profit, because if a company doesn't make a profit, it goes bankrupt. So everything's got to be set within that context. And I think the problem for saying that business companies now need to start taking account of all the things that are going on, the broader social concerns, broader civil society concerns, is that fine as long as you're not competing against Chinese companies. And if you're competing against Chinese companies, we're competing against some American companies. So there's always been the problem in the oil industry. European oil companies are very concerned about their reputations. They're worried about, they get upset when things go wrong. Chevron, Exxon say, we're big, bad oil. We don't care because you need our product. So I think we have to be realistic about what you can do competing in the real world. And finally, a cautionary story. Denmark, and this goes back to my question to Wilfried, Denmark appointed an ambassador to the tech sector. Man called Kasper Klinger, who represented Denmark in tech sector, tried to get them to regulate, explain how they should behave, and so on. Microsoft thought this was a really good idea, that not only should there be an ambassador to the tech sector, but Microsoft should have an ambassador to the European Union. What did they do? they recruited Casper Klinger and his team. They basically bought the entire Danish embassy to the tech sector and set them to work for the Microsoft against the European Union. Sometimes we get more than, sometimes we should wonder if what it is we wish for and if we really want it.
Can I join in here?
Oh yeah, Peter.
Yes, sorry, I've been listening all day off and on, but I do a lot of research into associations and also on the international level. We're mostly talking big companies here, and there are also some big companies a member of associations, but what we see is that the medium-sized companies are getting either smaller or bigger, and when they get smaller, they will depend more on associations to do their work for them. Earlier, we were talking about the role of institutions. Well, associations are a very old institution, but basically they have a horizontal democratic nature. And as such, they can be an interesting focus, I think, also for business diplomacy. When, especially when you see the need for many small companies to have a voice on the international stage and lacking the business or the diplomatic voice to do so skillfully. We just published a national research of all the associations in the Netherlands. And one of the dominant themes is cooperation together, with the problem of being, how do you have still a voice when something like 12 associations have to work together on the international stage? You have to make decisions on who's talking to whom when, either when it's to the European Union or to other continents. So associations are a sort of in-between structures that might become more meaningful in the future. So that's my point. I made it 5 years ago too in a paper, but I think the need to look at associations' role is even more necessary than it is now.
Perhaps what you mean with associations indeed could fit in what Raymond refers to as civil society.
Yeah, well, it's three segments. It's both business associations, professional associations, and voluntary associations. Together, they can become this civil society, but they have very different dynamics, and you should be aware of that.
Thank you. Inigo, I mean, you introduced the statement and then there were a number of responses, whereas again, thank you, Sean, was quite the most provocative. Any new insights or things that you would like to add or respond?
Well, that would take a while, but and I'm not saying that business diplomacy is new, right? I mean, Spanish companies created 500 years ago to exploit the resources of many parts of the world were already doing business diplomacy. And what I'm saying is that the companies, the private sector, is very much aware, and we're talking also about small and medium companies, of their capability to shape the ecosystem, not only to lobby or to obtain. And also, and I don't think we will agree on this, but maybe we should start thinking on China or the States, or specifically China, that Sean knows a lot about, that probably China from 10, 15 or 10 years ago is not going to be the same China in 10 years. And this includes their perspective, the way they deal with the others, and also the accountability they will be submitted to, right? And maybe I'm too optimistic or Eurocentric on this, but my perspective, and when I said including countries where public opinion has been taken into account before, that I was specifically referring to China. And so if Chinese companies are going to be continuing, and they will, in this global interdependent system, there are things that will be also changing on their side, right? But I might be wrong on this, right?
I would like to add two examples to Sean's critical view on the diplomatic role of companies in dysfunctional and unwillingness government. I think the latest example is the one of Trump withdrawing from climate change, and major companies as well as state and city governments have taken up the role in upholding the contents of some of the contents of climate change. That's number one. Number two, a personal experience. Posted in Pakistan, I noticed that the Aga Khan Foundation, actually a worldwide business undertaking, was the major driving force for schooling and education in those areas where the Pakistan government has no control whatsoever. So it does exist in a positive way in situations of dysfunctional and unwillingness government governance. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Raymond. Yeah.
Thanks. I think what Wilfried just mentioned now is another interesting topic, but we should not mix and not keep together in the same bag philanthropic initiatives like the Aga Khan Foundation, which are oftentimes hybrids. They're not just doing good, so to speak. They have at the same time business interest. And sometimes they use philanthropic activities either to look good or to better sell the other products they have. So to me, that's not business diplomacy. That's philanthropy and hybrid philanthropy, which is an interesting phenomenon because it's also increasing these days. But what Sean said is true. Their research has been done, for instance, about businessmen who went off from Switzerland, from other countries during the colonial period to be, on one hand, doing their business, and then at the same time being the consulate or the honorary representative of the country they're from. Now, their intention, to my reading of it, was basically just to do business and to represent government because it was useful, but it was still mostly in the context of colonial expansion. So to me, it's a matter of defining it that way. Of course, maybe you don't agree with it, but I see business diplomacy is, from a normative point of view, more closer to the SDGs than a continuity of the old style mix of some diplomacy, but basically as a useful annex to being as much of a hard business that one can imagine, because in the past, during the colonial period, that also included slavery and being involved in the slavery market.
Sean, I'll give you the floor for a final comment on this, and then we'll move on to get to a conclusion of our today's event. Sean.
Yeah, I think that Raymond's raised a really important point, and it's a general point about business diplomacy. And it's an issue that I've dealt with in relation to many other kinds of diplomacy: science diplomacy, food diplomacy, sports diplomacy, other, for me, imbecilities. One of the problems that we have in all these discussions is we don't have a prior discussion about what we mean by diplomacy. And we forget that there is a practice and a theory of diplomacy that's existed through centuries, which continues today, which may or may not have value in helping to manage international relations. And if we're going to talk about business diplomacy, we somehow have to relate what we're talking about to diplomacy. And too often we see business diplomacy or other kinds of diplomacy used as a slogan, used as a flash phrase, which we find quite fun because perhaps it helps us get some research grants or the like, but without thinking about that link to diplomacy. What is it about business diplomacy that makes it diplomacy rather than business marketing, business public relations, lobbying, or whatever? Right? And I think there's a debate that perhaps still hasn't taken place. You and I, Hub, wrote about this years ago in the Hague Journal of Diplomacy, where we tried to get a fix on it. I think we've still not quite got that defined. And I think that's a point that Raymond was picking up very well about the Aga Khan Foundation.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for really rolling out the carpet for indeed the remark. Just reflecting a little bit back, because we had today quite a number of entries, paper presentations that tried to contribute to that debate. What you're now addressing, indeed, what exactly are we talking about, and what is diplomacy? What is business diplomacy? Right. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, Wilfried. Thank you, Sean. Fantastically, I mean, and thank you, Inigo, for being a panel member and introducing these statements in order to provoke, enrich, yeah, you know, push us out of our own comfort zones, whether it's Eurocentrism or whether it's xenocentrism or whatever kind of centrism. Thank you. You know what I would love to, we have our mics perhaps unmuted, but sometimes I would love to applaud, you know, and perhaps we all who is now online, who are now, that is at least 30 plus people are online, we could unmute and do this. Yes. Thank you. Oh, this is really great. Inigo, I'll give you the floor to.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to finish today's event. Again, thank you very much for all of you who have attended. I know this has been a long session, but as we came to this online way of doing this second international conference, we thought that this would be the best way to bring everyone together in a single session. So I would briefly, and you really gave me a hard moment, because I would briefly go through the entire thing in 2-3 minutes, and then Hope will make some closing remarks and announcements, right? And that would be it, right? So we started this morning with Wilfred Bolevsky keynote speech, which was extremely interesting. Very difficult to summarize, right? But he presented a number of ideas related to business operations, the social impact, the corporations contributing to social problems, right? The moral imperative, right? And the business success linked to connecting it to social transformations, right, in corporations as political actors, right? Then we and some of these ideas have been really cross-cutting the rest of the sessions, and I think every one of us has to a certain extent address some of the issues that Wilfred presented at the beginning. We went into the first panel presenting papers where Nayara presented the business diplomacy approach from the international political economy theory, and in this post-globalization situation, what was the role of business diplomacy from this new perspective? And thanks to her research results on multinational corporations operations in international system. Then Ander Caballero presented international relations and security issues, right? Business diplomacy and security issues, how business diplomacy operations do have an impact on security in a very wider sense, understood in a very wider sense, and also linked to a case study, in this case with Bolton Food, which is a multinational corporation and specifically is part of the Bolton Group, but specifically devoted to tuna industry, and how this security business operation how security is linked to business operation and to sustainability. Then we move to Sergio Caballero's paper, which also is starting from the point of view of post-globalization and the U.S.-China bipolar system, covered the business diplomacy as a value lever to create an intra and extra capabilities in the companies, right? Then we opened a wonderful session moderated by Deusto Sibide, by Professor Sibide, which covered the African economic diplomacy, and we had there Fadi and Dongo, who presented very interesting from the African analysis, the idea of integrating the African economies, the idea of international markets by exercising African business diplomacy. Also presented an initiative that has to do with small and medium enterprises and business diplomacy. And in there, and then Professor Sana gave us a fantastic analysis on business diplomacy with case analysis in Africa, and presenting some advances on the traditional ideas he created and some years ago, and moving forward and applying the analysis into this case, right? Then Professor Licia Sanagiu also made a very, very interesting case analysis with economic diplomacy, business diplomacy relationship, and with the case analysis of the Belt and Road Initiative, but with a very interesting historical perspective, right? She brought it from the early days of Roman Empire, Chinese and dynasty linked in so and how securing global chain and global value chain works these days as an update version of that old times connection, and applied it to the case of Africa, where business diplomacy by Chinese companies could be exercised, and she said, with responsibility, sustainability approach, etc. Right? Then we moved to the second round of paper presentations with Mark Pasmar and Stelius, who presented very, very a surprising approach to business diplomacy when dealing with distracted industry firms to acquire social license to operate, which is an sector or subsector of industrial subsector has been very often connected with bad practices, right? And they have created a methodology to analyze these the different ways of building strategic business diplomacy for those industry to perform better, right? And they also explain their methodology about making the different steps in their research. Then Taghi and Abdullah presented another paper on the business role in conflict management, and how business and connecting with ethnic conflict, with identity, with the role of business in this co-ethnic conflict management, right? In the case of Kurdish populated area in between Iran and Iraq, and how the role of that of those business operations could really change some political situations, right? And particularly analyzing, as they will be doing with again small and medium enterprises. And the third paper on this second round, second panel of paper presentations was Hope Rules. Business diplomacy by multinational corporations serving the common good from the common social thought perspective, and trying to present a particular theoretical perspective to the analysis of business diplomacy, which is something we have, according to them, been missing so far, right? And the idea of common good, which has also created enormous interactions in the participants and also in the audience, as even to the point where somebody said, to define what common good means and how common is common good, right? So a fantastic job on that side too. And then we moved into the last this last roundtable, which has been also extremely interesting with these 4 statements, right? That are here presented in the PowerPoint, right? Where, as expected, the debate has been open around the different interpretations of business diplomacy. Well, we have even questioned the at the very end. We have even questioned the definition of business diplomacy or diplomacy itself. And we started with Kristen. We started discussing the stakeholders, transference or way of operating based on more stakeholders, and then we moved into the statement about capitalism survival with Sean, which questioned really that capitalism could or could not survive because of transnational solidarity or empathy, but because of many other calculations that have to be from an according to a non-Eurocentric perspective that is a little bit more realistic than maybe the aspirations that we have from the scholar world. And then the third statement was presented by Wilfred, which is about engagement in between businesses and governments. And also this was connected with the first two elements, right? And with the some of the ideas that Wilfred presented in the keynote speech, and then developed on the last one, right? And then the fourth statement, which was my statement, but presented by me, which was on the role of companies once they are aware, they walk up about the capacity to co-shape the ecosystem, and whether to what extent it could be going one way or the other, and how this is connected with public strong governments, public policies, capabilities, etc., 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 and very brilliantly by Professor Sanner also connected to a business diplomacy approach, which is not based on other things, but more on the sustainable development goals, right? And with this, I did my best. Hope everyone feels represented on this very, very brief summary. And I'm going to pass the floor to Hope, which is going to present us some last words and thank yous. And probably as I'm not going to be meeting you again later, just to say goodbye and let you know that in Deusto you are all very welcome, and we just the tip of a community that has been many years working on business diplomacy, and we have created this little university has created a modest knowledge hub that wants to bring all of you an opportunity to participate, to publish, to research, to teach, to be educated on this. So I hope yours is the floor.
On behalf of Huub, I would like to say that he is here within, I think, a second. He needed to go somewhere quickly and he's opening the door, so I will present you Huub, and the floor is all yours.
My sincere apologies. Wow. Inigo, you're muted.
If you can present maybe these two initiatives.
Yeah, we will. Thank you, Inigo. But really, I was listening to your summary and then suddenly I thought, okay, before I can continue, I need to do something what nature calls, Anyway, yes, first of all, thank you, Inigo. I mean, you thanked already people, but the funny thing, Inigo, I've got this mouth mask, by the way. Maybe, you and I I wanted to, yeah, exactly, give you the elbow from Spain. Because without you, without all of us, without Rian, without your Stella, right? This wouldn't be possible either. Anyway, we will have great follow-up ideas. Two of those initiatives are the following two. First of all, we're happy that the International Journal of Diplomacy and Economy is willing to host a special issue with papers within the theme of the conference. But the idea is that in this case, we will be inviting authors to submit. But anyway, that will be a great follow-up of sharing some of the ideas and continuing the debate on the issues today raised, whether it's on the definition of diplomacy and business diplomacy or on other issues. The second thing is that we agreed with the publisher of the previous business diplomacy book, Emerald Publishers, to have another one as a outcome of this conference. And for that, we will send out and share and distribute a call for chapters by the end, by February, the latest, we expect. And that would allow many of us who are active in the field to, we hope that you would be willing to share your ideas and to be as a chapter in that book. So at least we will try to push forward and try to push the debate on business diplomacy, what it is and how it should look like, and how we all together can benefit from it. Is it from a realistic or an idealistic perspective? Inigo, what else?
I think that's it. Thank you everyone for their participation, for the time, for staying so long, right? And thank you both universities for co-hosting and working on the SDGs 17, right? Creating alliances, which is that's the idea. And well, we will be contacting you soon. We've got all your emails, and we will be editing these recorded sessions. We will be editing them and in different pieces, and will be available at the and also we will be contacting those panelists who have been intervening if they want to share their slides with the rest of the people who have participated, in case they want. And maybe we can do it through the website. So just letting you know that you should keep a little bit of attention on the website, because there are lots of things coming, and we're gonna keep it active with businessdiplomacy.eu. And in case you have any things that you want to publish, any things that you want to advertise, like things going on at your own universities, institutions, etc., we are very happy to create this space, which is open for everyone. And so contact us and feel free to fill this businessdiplomacy.eu as also your own space, right?
Thank you. So how now shall we say, like, hasta la vista, or thank you, or?
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day. Have a great night. Have a great morning. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you.